Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Schools in England are to get a £1.3 billion bailout over 2 years, but the money will have to come from savings elsewhere in the education budget. The announcement by the Education Secretary, Justin Greening, follows protest by head teachers and MPs that schools have been facing unsustainable cuts. Labour has criticised the move as nothing more than a sticking plaster. Our education correspondent, Gillian Hargreaves, reports.
Only yesterday, another protest from teachers and parents who say their schools need more money. For months, heads have written letters and parents protested, from the southeast of England to the northwest. Today, Justin Greening acted on an election pledge to divert more money from civil servants in London to schools across England.
The additional funding I'm setting out today, together with the introduction of a national funding formula, will provide schools with the investment they need to offer a world-class education to every single child. There will therefore be an additional £1.3 billion for schools and high needs across 2018-19 and 2019-20.
School spending will rise from £41 billion in 2017 to £43.5 billion by 2020. And no secondary school pupil will have less than £4,800 spent on their schooling. It also means plans to reallocate spending, which would have seen losses for some schools, particularly in inner cities, will now see cash gains.
The devil will be in the detail, and as I understand it, it's not new money from the Treasury, but from other parts of the education budget, so we'll have to see what the impact is elsewhere. But from a school's point of view, obviously that level of investment is welcome.
Here's my magnet.
Although the money will be welcome, schools are facing rising bills for teachers' pay and pensions and running costs. And this extra investment will come from money already set aside for education.
I welcome the £1.3 billion announced today, but can the Secretary of State confirm if it will be per pupil budgets in real terms or just the overall budget? Astoundingly, this has all been funded without a penny of new money from the Treasury.
The government's been galvanised to dig in its pockets because of frustration in classrooms across England and anger at the school gate. Whether it'll be enough to help relieve the pressure on class sizes and teachers' jobs is still unclear. Gillian Hargreaves, BBC News.
Now, schools across England will receive an extra £1.3 billion over the next 2 years, the government has announced. But the money will come from efficiencies and savings within the department's own budget. Justine Greening confirmed plans for a national school funding formula, saying it would be supported by extra investment. But Labour demanded to know which budgets would be raided to supply the funds. Fatima Manji has this report.
The last few days of school are always a challenge. Children, often already distracted by the thought of holidays, need enticing into classrooms. And for the government, a challenge too. How to placate parents and head teachers who've been angrily campaigning against school cuts. Today, the Education Secretary offered this sweetener.
There will therefore be an additional £1.3 billion for schools and high needs across 2018-19 and 2019-20. The additional funding I'm setting out today, together with the introduction of a national funding formula, will provide schools with the investment they need to offer a world-class education to every single child.
Labour says it's not enough.
Mr. Speaker, what the Secretary of State has announced today is nothing more than a sticking plaster. Per pupil funding will still fall over the course of this Parliament unless further action is taken urgently. I will welcome the opportunity to protect budgets for our schools, but this statement alone will do nothing of the kind.
With reports of growing class sizes, staffing cuts and parents being asked to fill funding gaps, the government has been feeling the pressure of campaigns led by teaching unions and parents. Analysis by polling company Survation suggested 750,000 votes were swung by the issue at the election. And the protests have marched on since. Today, campaigners were pleased the government has been forced to change direction, but concerned about where the money is coming from.
Well, clearly it's not new money, it's recycling money within the department. We need to see more detail about where those cuts are going to come. Sometimes you make cuts to back office and it affects the front line, so we need to see more details about that.
And some fear the funding isn't enough to reverse the impact of cutbacks already made by overstretched schools.
Things like not having glue sticks, not having pencils. I mean, we're talking about the UK in 2017 and, you know, basic equipment that students require just we're not able to provide. Things like school trips that enrich students' learning, we're not able to provide. And I think that what we have now is an education system that's been really pared back. It's bargain basement.
The details of funding for each school will be announced in the autumn.
Fatima Manji reporting.
Well, as I said earlier, there was an announcement on schools funding today, an extra £1.3 billion a year, paid for in some arcane ways of taking money out of the capital budget of the Education Department and the budget for free schools. Now, this should ensure there's no real terms reduction in per pupil spending on schools. But with me now is Angela Rayner, the Shadow Education Secretary. Very good evening. Thanks for coming in. It seems like the government is listening and is responding to what it has probably correctly perceived as a sort of dissatisfaction with funding for schools.
Well, there was an amazing campaign extraordinary campaign led by the parents of pupils that were concerned about the school funding cuts and the head teachers, which was unprecedented actually in the way that they've written to parents and said, you know, we can't afford to provide school books and to carry out the curriculum. So I think they led a tremendous campaign. The government have obviously took heed of that, but of course they've already cut school budgets by 2.8 billion. So those cuts are already happening now. These are cuts that were further planned in
Right, but they're putting money in. It's a bit churlish to complain. And particularly, actually, you didn't like the free schools budget, did you?
Well, I felt that some of the money that was spent, if you look at the National Audit Office and you look at what the Public Accounts Committee have said about the money that was wasted on free schools that actually weren't even in the places we required them.
I can't understand why you don't see this as just a good news day and say, Theresa May, Justine Greening, thank you very much. This is what we've been arguing for.
Because unfortunately it's not new money and 2.8 billion is still missing from that. You know, the teachers that have wrote out to parents that have said we haven't got the money this year, they're not going to get any extra money this year. So come September, that money will still be gone from their budgets. Those teaching assistants will still unfortunately not be in their jobs.
Right. But they are on course to be by 2022 spending $4 billion extra on schools, aren't they?
Well, they're saying they're not going to cut budgets any further. We have to look at the detail. But of course, there's no new money. That's the important thing about this as well. They've taken it out of one hand and put it into another, and they haven't even been clear about where that money's coming from either, which is a real concern because, of course, we know that we need school places. We know that there's a crisis in terms of our class sizes are increasing. So if they're not creating free schools, which I prefer actually local authority schools, then they need to be putting the money in there.
Now, what's interesting, and people have sort of argued this against your party's policies, is if schools are in need of so much money, why would you have a policy of spending twice as much than you were planning to spend on schools on wealthier university graduates by abolishing loans, by abolishing fees? Because that was by far the most expensive thing in your manifesto, and it was going to do nothing for schools.
Well, nearly over 50% of the money that we raised in the manifesto went on our National Education Service. And I make
you put $6 billion on schools, including school meals.
Yeah, we put $6 billion
on
The
government's
schools.
putting $4 billion, but you put $11 billion on university students.
Yes, we did, because we didn't feel that they should carry that burden. But we also put money into early years, which was important. You know, saving our Sure Start centres, which the government, we've lost.
Hang on, was that part of the $6 billion on the $6 billion?
No, it wasn't. It was $500 million on top of that, which was to protect Sure Start centres. We've lost 1,200 of them. They've been lost since the coalition came into power. And we've said, and I've been quite clear, that if we had an extra pound, it should go into early years. So we propped it up there. But we know we've got a skills crisis.
The early years stuff can help the schools.
Just to come back to the point on the tuition fees, we've got a crisis in our country at the moment of skilled workers. We're coming out of Europe, and we know we need those skilled workers. And if we don't start investing in young people and giving them those opportunities and saddling them with that debt is not the way to do it. We've got to start tackling that crisis that we face.
you broadly speaking accept the analysis of the Office for Budget Responsibility, which last week gave a warning on fiscal risks, basically. And it came out with some interesting lines. You know, in many recent fiscal events, giveaways today have been financed by the promise of takeaways tomorrow. The risk is that the tomorrow never comes. New unfunded giveaways would take the government further away from its medium-term fiscal targets. Do you basically accept that analysis or not?
Well, our manifesto was funded, and we talked about investment in our future and in our regions, the regional banking structure, about skills that our regions require. Businesses tell me, when I go around to businesses, they say to me, Angela, we don't have the skilled workforce that we require, and that's why they go to Europe and other places for them.
So one thing in your manifesto, one thing in the election that was not costed was the promise to students who have already graduated and paid £9,000 fees retrospectively to write off or to do something about their debt.
That's right.
Presumably that has gone then. I mean,
well, no, it was an aspiration that Jeremy said that he would want to look at, our leader, but it was never in the manifesto.
So, but don't bank on that happening if you're one of those people and Labour wins an election.
Well, no, it's not a case of banking on it. Let's be clear, that 100 billion of debt is what this government has saddled the current students with. What we said is if we were in government, we would abolish tuition fees, and we would look at that as an aspiration. We've not made any promises on the 100 billion of debt that this government has created on the students of today. We've said if we get into power, we would abolish them from that day forth, and we would look at what we could do, but we wouldn't make uncosted promises.
Angela Rayner, thanks very much.
Thanks
ever so much. Thanks.